Standard Bank is an example of a company working towards creating a gender-equal world, which brings us to our fire chat for the morning, themed HeforShe, how and why the Standard Bank Group has committed to creating a gender-equal world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Dr. Wendy Orr, who is the head of group inclusion at Standard Bank, and of course our panelist, Mr. Thulani Sibeko, who is the chief marketing officer of the Standard Bank Group.
But perhaps we can talk just a little bit more about the philosophy that drives the movement and how is it different from other gender equity initiatives?
I think for me, what stands out is that men and women are standing alongside each other. I think we've seen many initiatives over the years, some of which would have been driven largely by women, I guess trying very hard to take their rightful place in society. But I think HeforShe says men and women along side by side each other is really what stands out for me about HeforShe.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me into this space of wonderful women. It feels special to be a part of this. And to build on Ntombi's point, I think what is special about HeforShe is that it is an inclusive approach. Mm-hmm. Inclusive, and in its involvement of men, it says we recognize men as partners who can drive the change that we seek. It's also accessible in that at all levels of society, people can take part in HeforShe. And lastly, the attractive part about it is that it responds to people who want to be involved but don't know how. Mm-hmm. It gives a lot of inspiration on the different things that people can do to support this movement of gender equity.
Oh, fantastic. So, Thulani, why then has Sim Shabalala, our Chief Executive for the Standard Bank Group, on behalf of the Standard Bank Group, signed up for HeforShe as a thematic champion?
Yes. There are different reasons that I would like to express, but I think the first and most critical one is that as a CEO, Sim has a personal conviction on the matter. Mm-hmm. This matters a great deal because when it comes to change, we all know the importance of that being led from the top. So Sim, in his personal capacity, in his view of life, is convicted about the importance of this matter. And I would like to share with everyone the words that he expresses because I cannot do them justice if I just interpret. He said, "Achieving gender equity is a moral duty, a business imperative, and just plain common sense. Women embody half the world's talent, skill, and energy, and more than half of its purchasing power. So every sensible business leader must be committed to achieving gender equity in their company and to contributing to gender equity in the societies in which we operate." And Sim could bring along the organization also because in one of our values, where we talk about respecting each other, we have high regard for dignity for everyone, mm-hmm. men, women. And I would further add that there is an inherent organizational recognition that we are not just about the core business that we do of finances. As an organization, we have an important role to play in society, and we can be an agent for change, and this is one area we thought we could be that agent for change. And since we are talking about Standard Bank, it's wonderful to say the things that we've said, but it's quite another. Maybe we can share some of the things that demonstrate that we are walking the HeforShe talk.
Sure. Wendy?
I think one of the things that has really struck me is that we have made a very public commitment to meeting particular targets in respect of gender equity. And when I say public, it's on the stage at the UN General Assembly that we are saying these kinds of things. And for me, that's very powerful. So we will be held to account for these. We have to report once a year to UN Women in terms of how we're doing against those targets. So it's not as if we're kind of, hoping we may make some improvement if we try, but we're actually really committed and will be held accountable for that improvement. And Ntombi's going to speak a little bit more about the actual programs that we're putting in place to achieve those targets. But I just want to make a point that we also don't see this as entirely separate from the culture work, the leadership work, and the diversity and inclusion work that we do. So it's not as if HeforShe is something we do when we have a couple of spare moments. It's an integral part of the kind of culture that we are trying to create in Standard Bank. And I think that's important because without that integration into who we are, these kinds of things are not sustainable. One thing I'd like to say, which is perhaps separate from the targets and the internal programs, is that as part of our commitment, we are, over the next 2 years, contributing $3 million to UN Women projects on the African continent. And our money will be going, in particular, to empowering women through climate-smart agriculture. And I think that's just incredibly exciting because it speaks to economic empowerment, it speaks to Africa's future, it speaks to sustainable development. So again, a very real putting your money where your mouth is kind of initiative from Standard Bank.
And Ntombi, there are other things also?
Yeah, in fact, there's quite a bit of activity. So since I guess we made it very known about our commitment to HeforShe, the different business units within Standard Bank Group have given this their own interpretation. And so I'll probably just walk through a few examples in terms of what the different BUs are driving at the moment. So what really stands out for me, I think the one that I'm very close to, is the Last Mile initiative, which focuses on our Africa region's space. So we operate in 20 countries in Africa. Now, what Last Mile focuses on is to say one of the commitments that we made, because part of being a thematic champion, you've got to make a specific commitment in terms of how you're going to achieve a gender equal space in your organization. We are targeting that we would have women chief executives in Africa regions from 10% to at least 20% by 2021. And so that's only a minimum, I think it's by no means, something that we think, we achieve that and it's a tick and that's it. We do think there's importance to make sure that women are represented quite equitably in our leadership ranks. Now, what the Last Mile initiative focuses on is on the development piece, because we run succession planning days, we call them people days, and women, and the way we dissect that is that, who's ready now to take over from another chief executive, who's ready in 1 to 2 years, who's ready in 3 to 5 years. Last Mile, therefore, focuses on making sure that we're strengthening our talent pools and succession pipelines to ensure sufficient depth and breadth of capability for the future, specifically focusing on women. And I must say, this is something that I'm very close to. Given my role in the bank, looking after the hiring function for the entire group, and largely somebody could say that I focus on the buy strategy. Last Mile focuses on your develop. And how do we accelerate our women leaders to take over as chief executives in the near future. We also have an initiative in one of the business units in our corporate and investment banking business called See the Whole Me. And that really is not about just a focus on gender. it really kind of centers us about you bring the whole of who you are in an organization. And that could mean then it's how do we celebrate the diversity of people that we have in our organization, and that talks to women. It could speak to your LGBTQIA+. I never get it right, Wendy. It could be any personality that exists in our business. So how do we celebrate our people? So some of the things that they are driving in particular that are geared towards HeforShe. One is we are looking at a Dignity Dreams partnership. So how do we teach young boys to put together sanitary packs for girls in rural areas that may be prevented from attending schooling because they have no sanitary goodies, when that time comes in the month. Something that focuses on men in particular is what we call barber shop. And these are it's like a speaker series to kind of channel men's energy to say, how do we channel that masculinity into a gender equal world?
Okay.
And just maybe, to mention, one or two. Also, they are running a parenting speaker series that, says, how do we raise children in a he-for-she world? Also, I guess, you spoke about inclusion earlier, Tulani. So how do we make sure that all our employees have a personal connection to he-for-she? We are running a group-wide pledge initiative so that everybody makes their own personal commitment to what is it that they're going to do differently in contributing towards a gender equal world.
That's quite a few things that we do externally. And the only one other thing, rather internally, the only one other thing that I'd like to share that we did externally is during International Women's Month, we did the unpardonable sin as far as brand is concerned. We changed the logo of the wonderful blue Standard Bank into magenta. This was, we thought, a powerful way of declaring to our clients, to our communities, that we support this cause and we are committed to it. And the kind of dialogue that it generated was positive in itself because it gave us an opportunity to talk about he-for-she, to talk about gender diversity.
Yeah, I have to say that's something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, was blue turning magenta. It was awesome. It was so exciting. Ntombi, although this movement is really unique, there are some women who feel that we don't need men to come, charging in on a white horse to help us, and that this is quite patronizing. How do you respond to that?
It absolutely is not. Perhaps it's good to maybe draw your attention to why UN Women, what they associate the he-for-she movement with. So really what he-for-she is inviting people around the world to stand together to create a bold, visible force for gender equity. And we do that by creating a gender equal world. Now, I subscribe, in fact, as I came in, there was a photo, a booth, and I thought, okay, perfect moment to shine, Thames. Smile, you're on camera. And, the lady said, we'll email you the photos. And there was a quote, you kind of had about 4 or 5 quotes. I'm sure some of you who took a photo would have seen that. I chose one that really resonates with me, and that is, if you want to go fast, and this is an African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. Now, at the core of he-for-she, and I think we spoke about this, Wendy, earlier, is to say what differentiates it is the inclusivity element. I think Tulani also spoke to that. but also the fact that men and women walk along, side by side each other. And that is really at the core of HeforShe.
So I think the key message is it's not about helping, it's about partnering, advocating, and being an ally.
Yeah. Because help almost it just speaks to weakness, and certainly this is not about helping.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, my screen kind of freezes now and then, so if you just bear with me. So a couple of prominent themes have emerged as the HeforShe movement has developed. One is a focus on so-called toxic masculinity and gender-based violence. Is there danger that in this type of conversation we run the risk of actually alienating men and painting them as the villains? Should we try to change this narrative, and if so, why, Thalani?
I guess there was no guessing who that question was for. It's fair to say that the danger is real.
Yeah.
And it's real for different reasons. For those who are old enough, you might remember in 1995, there was a women's conference in Beijing. After that conference, a lot of men ran for cover. And there has been a lot of conferences and resolutions since that time. And admittedly, us as men have not covered ourselves in glory, because some of our men are the reasons that the agenda is not progressing fast enough. But I do hope, though, that people who look at this objectively will be caught by the spirit of HeforShe. Because the spirit of HeforShe does not say all men are responsible for the barriers to the equity. But the spirit of HeforShe says anyone who is willing, who is convicted and supports gender equity can play a part. So I think for me that's the first thing. The other thing, I think for us as men, we have some work to do. If you recall in the conversations about rape, there is a growing and progressive view that says instead of coaching women, the people that needs to be coached more is the men. So even in this case, there is toxic masculinity. It's real. The way some of us have been brought up fuels that. And it is only by us men reflecting on the assumptions we make about women, reframing those assumptions, only when we do that, we become ready to embrace the equity, and for some, not even be threatened, but more importantly, to open our eyes for the benefits that we are depriving society, we're depriving organizations whenever we don't give women appropriate opportunities, because we know, just like men, they excel in things that men can do.
You actually remind me, we had Eusebius McKaiser come and talk at Standard Bank last month about HeforShe, the role of men in supporting gender equality. And he made the point that as long as men live in a gender unequal world, they are compromising their own humanity, which I thought was quite profound, because that does speak to the fact that gender equity benefits men as much as it benefits women.
That's right. And I mean, if I just maybe make a comment about your previous question, Wendy, the UN, United Nations, was set up in October 24, 1945. Now, what's interesting, and I think this is something I'm stealing from Thalani, because, this was a moment of education for me, when you said in their charter then, which is 74 years ago, gender equity was catered for. Now, if we speak about, are women thinking, they are being helped? It's been 74 years that this conversation has been going on. So something has got to fundamentally shift in the approach that we take.
Yeah, no, it's true. Maybe we make a transition now to another real matter of interest, which is gender pay gap. Wendy, what is Standard Bank doing in this regard?
Thanks for that hot issue, Tulani. Yes, it is. It's a very important issue and one which we take very seriously. Certainly internationally, more and more legislation is being introduced which requires organizations to report on the gender pay gap, and we want to be on the front foot in this regard because I'm sure in time there will be similar requirements in South Africa. So we've actually put together a working group led from our remuneration space. First of all, to analyze and understand what the pay gap is in Standard Bank, and let's not be naive. Every organization in the world has a gender pay gap, and I can't say that Standard Bank is any different. We want to understand what is driving that gap in order to be able to find remedial actions. And I think there are two issues, and our response to them needs to be different. There are the systemic and structural inequities, which mean, for example, that women are underrepresented in senior, client-facing, revenue-generating positions in the bank. So because men dominate in those kind of areas, the average pay of men is higher. So that requires a longer-term structural intervention. However, there may also be instances of where we do look at men and women doing very similar jobs, but still not earning the same. And that requires a much more immediate and short-term intervention and adjustments in salary, immediately, or as I say, certainly in the short term. I just want to mention that last year the BBC found that amongst its senior key presenters, there were 4 men and 1 woman, and the men were earning substantially more than the 1 woman. And the men actually agreed to take a pay cut in order to achieve equity. I'm not sure if we'll achieve that elsewhere, but I did think that was quite a profound, not symbolic action, but very real action. I don't think we'll be asking men in Standard Bank to take pay cuts. I think we will look to increase what women are earning where we find unfair discrimination.
You mentioned a very important point that structurally having the right roles, having women in leadership is quite critical. I wouldn't miss the opportunity of highlighting something that I'm proud to see in our organization. In South Africa, all 3 of our businesses, CIB, Wealth, and PBB, their CEOs are women.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly I'm also really proud to work for an organization that has been in the forefront in terms of appointing senior women into business positions. Tulani, you kind of referred to this in your response to the previous question, but a while ago I was being interviewed by a master's student. We try to support student research as much as possible in Standard Bank. And her research topic was the role of coaching in developing women leaders. And one of the questions she asked me was how I thought coaching could be used for the purpose of developing women leaders, and I said, coach the men. And I wasn't being facetious, because I truly believe that unless we change organizational culture and create an environment in which women can be both authentic and successful, training women, developing women, while obviously valuable, will not really lead to sustainable change. So how do you feel about this kind of point of view?
I totally share that sentiment. And, one of the things that I always embrace when it comes to change is that if you want to achieve change, you have to start where you are. Mm-hmm. And for me, in the context of our discussion, it's important to acknowledge that men come with experiences and backgrounds that inform their view of the world. And if we start from acknowledging that, then we say, what do we do from there? And if I speak to fellow men who are in the room or sitting somewhere receiving this through broadcast, I think one of the important things that will help us move forward in this is learning to be comfortable with discomfort. Because if you come from a certain background that is against the principles of equity, it won't be easy for you to just step out. And it's important that you intellectually embrace that so that when that feeling of discomfort comes, you are not surprised, but you soldier on. The other thing that I think is important is that as men, we need to be conscious and deliberate with our behaviors. And the range of behaviors that we need to be conscious of are endless. For example, when it comes to such matters, there's certain jokes that should not be funny when you are in the room. Because it is through humor that we sustain a lot of wrongs. It's the same thing with racism, it's the same thing with ageism, and all the other evil isms. We should not ignore what seems futile, and yet it reinforces things that are bad. And then lastly, in the context of HeforShe, let's truly embrace the spirit and the invitation that is given to men, that it starts with each of us, and we should not wait until the whole world subscribes to this view before we move. We all have influence of different kinds. Let's use that for positive change.
Thanks, Tilani. Ntombi?
Yeah, I'd concur with that. You know, I think you were quite daring in a true Wendy Orr way, saying, coach the men. I think, Tulani, you've kind of given good context to say, you know, we are products of our society. And we come from a society that does reinforce certain things. You know, like a colleague yesterday was just speaking about his son who prefers the color pink. And the teacher was kind of like saying, no, pink is for girls. And what's interesting, I've got girls only because I'm a mother of 3 girls. My girls prefer blue. And I wasn't there going to say, well, blue is a color for boys. Blue is just a color. And I think it's important that in this journey, therefore, you know, what is the role, you know, how do we include men as part of the coaching journey to really understand, to say, how do we unlearn some of, you know, the things that have been kind of institutionalized in our way of being, and in fact made to be okay in terms of, you know, how we behave.
Sure.
Yeah.
Perhaps to wrap up, let's just share some final thoughts, and I'll kick off. And I just want to emphasize that gender equality is not a zero-sum game. Some people seem to think there's only a certain amount of equality to go around. So if women have to gain equality, men somehow have to lose. And that's categorically not the way it is. It's a summative game. Everybody will gain. And that's why this partnership is so very important. One other point is, and Tulani, you did refer to this, is that while it might seem quite daunting to say how do we achieve gender equality, by simply adopting personal behavioral changes and committing to do things differently, we can start making that change. We don't have to wait for society to change or for the law to change. We can start with ourselves in terms of how we show up in our personal lives, in the workplace, and in our communities.
Yeah. It certainly takes the second person to start a movement. You know, you don't need millions of people to do that. You start small and you grow in a compound way, in a very powerful way. I'd just like to challenge, people in the room to say, next time you buy a McDonald's burger and for your child and it comes with a toy, because it's a boy, they can't get the girl toy. And if they want the girl toy, get them to take the girl toy. There's no such thing as a girl and a boy toy. It's just little things. And I think if you start to look at your everyday behavior, it's small things. Like I didn't think about the McDonald's example until somebody highlighted to me to say, well, I would have said, well, no, that's not a girl toy. Take that one. It happens so unconsciously. You don't even have to think about it. I'm just challenging us to say, can we take a moment to pause each time we are just about to reinforce around a gender stereotype?
I totally agree. And for me, in closure, I will have two remarks which I hope will encourage all of us. The first one is that the discussion might be framed in a women lens, but let's not forget this is a human issue. It's not a women issue. And secondly, it might be difficult, but it's not impossible. So let's pursue it.
Thank you.
That's right. Okay.